I've never owned a boat before, and I won't be able to get insurance.
False.
Boat insurance is not a legal requirement.
True, but in some states it is.
I just got my captain's license, so my premium will go down.
False.
Last one. I am a liveaboard, and the internet tells me I'm going to really struggle to find insurance.
False. Buying the boat is an involved process. You need a good yacht broker behind you who's patient and who actually is honest and doesn't have to sell you this boat. That's a huge one. And then a good insurance broker who can actually take the time and help you understand things. And that way you can help be prepared.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Current Yachts podcast. We have a guest today. Hugo is with us to talk about boat and yacht insurance. Hi, Hugo. How are you?
Hi, guys. I'm well. Thanks for having me.
We're very excited to talk about boat insurance now. Not always the most exciting topic, but very critical for every boat owner. Sometimes overlooked until it's too late. And so we're here to kind of answer all the questions that new boaters and even seasoned boaters may come across. So we're going to break down marine insurance from basic coverage to special needs. And then let's start with you, Hugo. What is your background? Are you a boater, actually?
I am. So, I have an old sailboat, 1969 Olson 38, and I'm a boater and I'm also a pilot. Grew up sailing and now I fly. But I enjoy being on the water. I live in Charleston, South Carolina, which I get to do that a lot, which I'm lucky.
Thank you for being here. So by the end of this conversation, we'd love our listeners to understand boat insurance a little bit better, know what questions to ask when they talk to their insurance broker, and make sure that they're comfortable and confident they're adequately protected when it comes to their boat and boating in general. We know every situation is unique. What we're doing here today is general education.
Everyone buying a boat is different. Every boat is different. What you want to do with your boat is different. And so, there is not a one size fits all solution. Pick a good broker and work with them, yacht insurance broker, as well as a boat broker as well, obviously. Let them help you. Don't try to do it all yourself.
Let me start with this quick question, actually. You mentioned boat insurance broker, yacht insurance broker. Is there actually a difference? Is it just terminology?
So that's a good one. There really isn't a difference. Some people like to call it a yacht and some people like to call it a boat, but from a carrier perspective, insurance company perspective, it's really the same. Just depends maybe how fancy it is.
Okay, very good. So what is marine insurance then, if we call it just marine insurance for all intended purposes?
So marine insurance is insurance that in this conversation covers your boat, right? If you're buying a small 20-footer, usually you can just list it under your homeowner's policy. But when it comes to larger boats, usually the insurance companies that write your house or your cars, they usually won't write a larger boat like that. And so the marine insurance market is a specialist market that caters to boat owners, yacht owners, and it's just a little more difficult, and has a little
More nuanced.
nuance, exactly, and
so
requires a bit more work.
You mentioned a cutoff. So it's not based on the horsepower of the boat. It's strictly like the size. Like if you could say there's like a cutoff, it's what, 22, 25 feet?
It depends on the insurance company. There's two factors really that create the cutoff for carriers that will write a boat under your homeowner's policy. Sometimes some carriers it's up to 22 feet, some 26, some 28. And then usually the homeowner's policy will not cover, make sure you check your policy, a boat that's more than, I believe it's 25 horsepower.
Okay.
Interesting. That's an interesting one. I didn't know
actually did not know that. I guess this is because I haven't gone into the small boat world myself. But so you mentioned earlier that there are different requirements, sometimes by state, sometimes there's other reasons why boat insurance is required. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Like who actually will require that you have insurance and so on?
So depending on the state, it varies. They may or may not require insurance. and again, it usually won't be checked, but that's up to you to verify it. But the one thing that we will always require insurance is usually marinas. So, what will happen is you'll pull your boat into a marina, and usually before you stay, they'll ask for your insurance policy, and they'll want to see on your insurance policy the liability limit, the third party liability limit, which is basically coverage for damage you do to someone else's boat or an injury that you do to someone else. And so usually a marina will require a certain limit of liability, which is usually included in most policies anyway.
Good. Yeah, we've had this experience too, even sometimes with a time of survey, right? When somebody gets ready to haul out a boat, they will require that proof of insurance. So it could be the marina, obviously, where your boat is kept, but also marine contractors that are preparing to do work on the vessel. Um,
Exactly.
so I'd love to know a little bit more about what to expect on like new boats versus used boat and age of the boat. A little bit like cars, I imagine it has a pretty significant impact. But that's a question we do get a lot, and I wanted to have your take on that.
Yeah. So we get calls a lot, and people think that because they're buying an older boat, right? I don't know how you want to define an older boat, but people will say, I'm buying a 1990 sailboat. I've heard I'm not going to be able to get insurance, and that's false. It's just the carriers that will write an older boat are a little more limited. The premiums are a little higher. The coverages are slightly weaker, but no, we insure really old boats, and it's just a matter of your market might be slimmer. But on a newer boat, let's say a 20-year-old boat, we'll sort of maybe use that as the threshold as what carriers might consider a new or an old boat. It's very easy.
Yeah, I've definitely heard
There's
that. Will I struggle getting insurance on this boat that's over 20 years old?
Yeah, and no, you won't struggle. It's just the market is a little smaller for who can write that, which carriers can do that.
So another topic that we perhaps don't discuss as often is kind of the nitty gritty, right? So what does the insurance actually include? What does it protect?
Yeah, that is a great question. The insurance policy, a standard insurance policy, has a few coverages that are listed, right? And so I'll just give you an outline of what they really are. So the first coverage you will see is the hull value. That's the value of the boat, right? So, usually that's what the purchase price is, or maybe if you've done some upgrades, you increase that, and so it'll be what the purchase price is. So you're buying a boat, hull value will be X, and within the hull value, there are two types of policies, which are, I think, very important to understand. And there's, some people want a certain type. First policy, which we always try to recommend in place, is what's called an agreed value policy. We're referring to the hull. And that means that if the boat is insured at $1,000, that's what you're purchasing the boat for, then if that boat sinks or burns down or is a total loss in a covered claim, you will get the agreed value.
Okay.
There is no arguing. There's no nickel and diming. You bought the boat for this much. You're getting the agreed value policy, and a policy will always say agreed value. Now, some people opt to go for what's called an actual cash value policy, which, in my experience, is somewhat ambiguous, and it usually does not favor the boat owner. So, an actual cash value policy, it's somewhat misleading because on the line item, on the coverage amount, it will say boat value 500,000. And when you have a claim in that situation, when you have a total loss claim, the insurance company will go and they will usually look online and they will find that same make, model, and boat, and they will find the cheapest one they can find, which could be much lower, could be 350,000. And now they're going to argue with you, and that is probably what you're going to get paid out. You're going to get paid much less
That
than you
sounds like
think.
car insurance. My car was
Very
totaled.
similar.
They did not, look at what I had just, I guess the equivalent car would be. They picked the lowest trim level. So that was a lesson to learn. And so evidently there must be a price discrepancy between the agreed upon, what did you call it again?
Actual
Agreed value.
Agreed value and the cash value.
Yep, correct. And usually actual cash values are much cheaper. We see it all the time. People will say, well, this is way cheaper. they'll say, look, the coverages are the same. And I say, well, actually, if you look there, it says actual cash value. You don't really, I mean, the point of insurance, if this is what you need, is to understand what you're insured for, what your investment is. Potentially, you might have a lender, right? You might have on this $500,000 boat, you might have a $400,000 loan. And when, God forbid, your boat sinks and the insurance company settles your claim for $350,000, you're out your $100,000 deposit. And now you're having to go and pay the lender the 50 grand and you're left with nothing.
Mhm.
And some policies are sneaky. They don't actually put it in the coverage. You'll read it within the policy wording. And so something to watch out for is always actual cash value.
Okay.
That's a
Wow.
good point.
Okay. I have to go check on mine, but
I know.
anyway, I'm pretty
I'm
sure
just
I'm all set
thinking
because I think I worked with Hugo on my
Marilyn,
sailboat
you are
policy.
an agreed value policy. I know that.
That's what I thought.
Good to know.
Okay, so that's and within the hull coverage, there are so many. Each policy is different, right? Even on an agreed value policy, every policy covers certain things, and that's something to discuss with your broker, and you can enjoy reading about a 30-page policy. But I think it's really important to do that. A lot of people don't read their policies, and it's important if you're going to be insured to understand what your coverages are. Okay, and I'm happy to discuss anything more about the hull value, but the second big coverage, which in my experience is actually the most important, is the third-party liability coverage. And some carriers call it third-party liability, some call it just liability, some call it protection and indemnity, or P&I, you'll see sometimes listed. It's coverage for any damage your boat may do to someone else's property, whether it be someone else's boat or a dock think of the worst thing you can do, it will cover that, right? And so it covers that, and it also covers injury to people. So if you hurt someone or hurt someone on your boat or someone on someone else's boat or someone on the dock, right? Usually it will cover that. What it will do is it will defend a lawsuit and it will pay a settlement. And that's a really important one because everyone's a safe boater until the tide catches them and you scrape the hull of $1 million or $100 million super yacht, and now it has to get painted. I mean, that rarely happens, or you accidentally run over a diver in the water and really injure them, and now you're having to defend a lawsuit. Or in my experience, friends on boats are friends until unfortunately they get really badly injured and a lawyer gets involved, and so that's a really important coverage. Most policies will have, $500,000, $1 million. I mean, you can really go as high as you want on that. It just depends what your risk tolerance is for that. And that is the cheapest coverage within an insurance policy is a
And
third party
I would
liability.
imagine it is particularly relevant in the US, where there's obviously a culture of litigation that perhaps is not found elsewhere. Hugo, what would happen if there was a similar incident with legal ramification outside the United States? That policy will cover that same, offer the same coverage in foreign waters?
That's correct. As long as your policy has you're within your navigational limits. That's correct.
Right.
Yeah, and America's so litigious. It's you drive down the highway and you see these billboards for "Have you been hurt? Sue," and so that's a really cheap coverage within the policy. I mean, in my experience, to bump $500,000 of liability to $1 million it's $150, give or take, depending on the insurance company. So that's wise. At minimum, have liability coverage.
Yeah, and I've seen it go south even in a friendship type situation where the boat is at the dock. They're not even on the boat. A drunk friend goes and jumps on the boat, slips and falls off the boat, gets severely injured, and then somebody needs to pay for the medical bills. And that's when this type of thing comes into play where it's, hey, this was an accident, but now who's going to pay for this? So it's important, even when it's coming to friends.
Yeah, it really is, Amanda. Yeah, it's just an unfortunate. Boats are dangerous in some ways. Accidents happen when they're not supposed to happen, and you want to know that you have an insurance company behind you that will actually help you in that situation.
So before we dig into the next segment of today's podcast with the types of coverage and some more specific questions around what is covered, tell us first, Hugo, in your experience, I understand not all carriers are created equal. You make recommendations for your clients, but can you speak to those differences and what does it mean to be an A-rated marine insurance company?
And that's a question we get a lot. Not all carriers are created equal. In my experience, you might have 3 carriers or 4 or 5, whatever, and you're putting their declaration page, which what a declaration page is it shows your coverages by line, coverages and deductibles. And people will say, well, this carrier is far more expensive than this other carrier, but I see that the coverages with the other carrier are actually better. And yes, while on paper they may be better, but in the event of a claim, what is this carrier's financial rating, right? Are they rated? Are they regulated? So that's a big one, right? Financial rating. And most carriers are A-rated. They should be. Also, how do they respond in claims? People think that it's all the same and it's not. Some carriers are really good on claims. Some carriers will actually help you. Other carriers may not. And I'm not saying because it's cheaper, it's worse. I'm saying really do your diligence. There's one carrier, I'm not going to say it, but they're much cheaper than all carriers. And, after we spend a long time helping our clients understand coverages and understand things, people say, well, this carrier is half the price. I'm going to go with that carrier. And, I just tell them, go online, just Google this carrier, claims reputation. And people unfortunately still go with them, which is okay. But people don't think they have claims. Everyone who calls us, myself included, I feel the same way. I don't make claims, but the whole point of insurance is if you have to make a claim for something maybe you couldn't control, maybe you got struck by lightning, maybe the current caught you, maybe your boat was stolen, right? I mean, there's a lot of things you can control, but in the event of a claim, are you going to actually have a good claims experience, which is the whole point of having insurance. So you might just have bought an expensive piece of paper.
Very
Yeah.
good.
That's a good point.
So, I have a few follow-up questions, and some of it pertain perhaps to sailing yachts. But when we speak about hull insurance, right, the physical damage to the boat, what is typically covered? Obviously, I would imagine engine electronics, other equipment, and you made a comment earlier about if you do upgrades, you should report those also to have proper coverage in case of loss. Can you speak to that a little bit? And then applicable to sailing, right? What about rig and sails?
Standing
Yeah, that's a
rigging, those types of things.
that's a great question. So, depending on the insurance company, it's always important to check your policy or ask your broker. But, usually everything is covered. Okay, that's the baseline the carriers start with. Okay, so usually everything is covered, but then within the policy you'll have exclusions. So we call this an all risks policy. Everything's covered, but here's what we won't cover, or here's how we will adjust a claim. The one thing that I would point out is usually never covered is mechanical breakdown. Very rarely on a yacht policy. What that means is if you're going along and the engine just, I don't know, you blow the cylinder or something, and the insurance company will not usually cover that. That's similar to if you started your car one day and it wouldn't start and now you want a new car. It's just not going to work like that. If you were going along and you hit something and it caused the engine to be damaged, you would be covered. What a lot of policies will do in the event, usually it's on boats older than 5 years, the policy will sometimes include a depreciation schedule. And this is really important, which will say, yes, in an agreed value policy, in a total loss claim, you're going to get the full amount. But in a partial loss claim, so we'll use the scary one, which is the lightning strike. In a partial loss claim on your $500,000 boat, the boat gets struck by lightning, and let's say it's a 10-year-old boat, right? The insurance company will usually go and they will look at the age of each damaged component. So use a chart plotter, for example, and they'll say, as per the depreciation schedule, we reduce our payments for electronics by 10% per year. Okay, we see this chart plotter is 5 years old. So you're going to get half the value of what a new chart plotter would be. Or you can use that, each component has its own depreciation schedule, which is within the policy. So you can read it and kind of understand it. And it's not based on the age of the boat, it's based on the age of the component. And so in a partial loss claim on an older boat, you won't be made fully whole, right? On a newer boat, you will be. Or if you have replaced all components recently, you will be. But a lot of carriers will reduce the payment just because, someone could have a $100,000 claim and end up getting $300,000 of new gear on it. And unfortunately, boat insurance policies on older boats, I'd say older than 5 or 6 years, are just not really intended to replace everything with new. It's just the only way these carriers can continue to stay in business. And so that's a really important, maybe getting off topic here, but that's an important thing to read in your policy is your
I think that's
depreciation
super
schedule.
important because there's definitely some either misunderstanding or just lack of knowledge. Because to be frank, I mean, who will actually read the entire policy from start to end? I think that just helps us zero in on certain parts of that document and verify for ourselves. Okay, what is my coverage today? And like you said, there may not be a lot of ways around this one, but it's super important to know. The depreciation schedule of your electronics is 5 years and now your boat is 6 years old, you're going to not be made whole by a lightning strike hitting the boat because your replacement cost, likely you would buy new electronics, and that won't buy you new electronics. Did I translate this
Yes,
correctly?
that's correct. And, what I would say is just talk to your broker. I would say read the policy, but also ask questions. And, a good broker will help you understand that.
And it's also very fair. It's also a very fair understanding that, you can't replace something that is old with something that is new and not expect to come out of your pocket a bit for it.
Yeah, exactly. And yacht insurance policies are just notoriously, um, you never win when you have a claim. You never. It's not like a homeowner's policy where, wow, they brought me a whole new kitchen. This is way big upgrade. You will always feel slightly out of
Hmm.
pocket because of the nature of the risk. I mean, we have these boats that are just constantly getting damaged. It's not like a house where you burns down once in a while. I mean, these boats, every time you go in and out of the marina, you're an inch away from a potential small little accident.
Another detailed point I wanted to dig into is so hurricane protection, hurricane damage. Can you give us a quick synopsis of that? How does it work? And what are kind of the things people should know when they're buying a boat, say in the Caribbean or in Florida? Like, tell us what that means.
Good question. So that is the big one. Hurricane coverage. Most policies include hurricane coverage, but it's really important to understand that a lot of carriers, if you're going to be, in Florida or in the Southeast or in the Caribbean, insurance companies will make you create a hurricane plan, right? Because that's the only way they can understand their risk, understand where it's going to be, understand how it's going to be secured. And it's not a hard plan to create. Really, what they're asking is, where is this boat going to be in the event of a hurricane or a named storm? And so long as you follow your plan, then, if the boat's destroyed, the insurance company will pay that claim. But a lot of people, and it's tough because a lot of people buy their boats to go cruising and no one knows where they're going to go. So it's just important that if you're a cruiser and you're in a hurricane exposed area, that you update your hurricane plan before a hurricane's right about to hit you. So, right now it's November and people are submitting hurricane plans for next year for 2026, which depending on the carrier is June or July. That's when it begins. Um, and so in my experience, not a lot of people are absolutely sure what they're going to do or where they're going to take the boat. So we say, look, create a plan now. And if this changes, update us before hurricane season or even update us during hurricane season. Say, hey, I know we said we were going to take it here, but here's our new plan. And that way, you're covered. But it's important to have a plan because people without plans, a lot of people think, especially when you're buying a boat, oh, if a hurricane comes, we'll just get away from it. And sure, if you have a motorboat and you can move, that's great. But it's very difficult on a sailboat to know exactly how you're going to get away from this storm. They're huge. You don't know if it's going east,
Right.
west, north, or south.
And
And so really have a plan.
I'll interject here to add, I think it's super critical to have someone that you can get on the phone or text or email and they respond right away. And again, my experience actually has been with Hugo's firm, so I can speak to that. Same day response, almost like every single time. It's super important. So I would just caution those who are perhaps hesitant about the broker they're working with now. Like, this is the kind of like plan adjustments, cruising plan, whatever that may be. You do want to have someone on the end of the line who's going to be very responsive. So that's also another reason why it's important to have that
Yeah.
on your
And
side.
and like you said, Marilyn, when you're first working on the, understanding insurance and maybe buying your boat, if the broker is not responsive at that point, wait until your policy is placed. It gets way worse. So just, like,
Having a
I
relationship
say
is super important.
it's huge. It's huge because, all the time, like, one of our main things we do all day long is add new operators to a policy, or it's Friday afternoon and someone's going into a marina and the marina says, no, you can't come in here until we get added to your policy, which is an easy thing to do. Um, now you're sitting there all weekend and maybe it's still Tuesday and your insurance agency hasn't gotten back to you. And you know, you will talk to your insurance broker more than you want to throughout the year because you'll have to have updates and you'll have to have maybe a policy change. So if you don't get a good feeling now, you're not going to get a good feeling after your policy's placed. It gets worse.
And coming back to the topic before about when a friend unfortunately may or may not get hurt on a boat, what about medical payments or uninsured boaters coverage and things like towing, things like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So within, we touched on the big ones, which are the hull and the liability, right? Those are the big coverages. But, most policies include other coverages like the dinghy, like medical payments, like towing, like emergency rescue, things like that. And so within the towing, most policies include that. It's usually a small coverage. If you're in the US and the Bahamas, I would have Boat US. Costs $150 or whatever it costs, and they'll come get you wherever. But yes, towing is included. You asked about medical payments, which I think is also an important one. A lot of people see medical payments listed and they believe that sometimes it's for them. So you as the boat owner, medical payments usually is not for you or your family members. It's for a friend or a guest that comes on the boat. And what a medical payments coverage is let's say you're on the boat and someone needs stitches or breaks their arm or has a small injury, that will step in and that will pay for that if the person doesn't have health insurance. So that's imagine it's a sort of a small payment before a large injury where a lawyer has to get involved. So it's like, we see it all the time. This guy got stitches and it's 10 grand and he doesn't have a health insurance. Carrier will just pay that. And, that's an important coverage to have. But we don't see it used all that often because a lot of people have health insurance, but it's not for you, the boat owner. Just remember that. Usually
For others,
for others. That's
passengers.
correct. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's correct.
So what changes when a boat goes from a boat to specialized coverage for yachts?
Yeah. So, I mean, it really is just a new policy, right? If you just have a boat, like a whaler or something at the end of your dock, fine, write it under your homeowner's policy, easy. But if you're cruising maybe, or your boat's a little bigger or over the threshold of what your homeowner's insurance wants to write, it becomes just a little more of an involved process. And now you have an individual policy that covers your boat and your liability. And so it's a bit more of an involved process because innately these boats move around and they're just a bigger risk. So I would say what really changes is the carrier wants to get the best view, the best understanding of you as an owner and what the boat's doing and where you're going to keep it. Is that helpful at all?
Yeah, I mean, let's go specific about charter companies and placing a boat into charter and then having crew coverage and maybe the Jones Act stipulations against certain things.
Yeah. So that's a great question. So most policies, check your policy, include cover for Jones Act, right? U.S. Longshore Workers Compensation Act, right? And so, that's important to have, especially if you're chartering or you're paying crew. But if you are a charter vessel, or maybe you have a private pleasure policy and You now have your captain's license, or you know a captain who comes to you and says, "Hey, I can charter this boat when you're not using it, and I can, help you offset expenses for the boat, or maybe even make money." It's very easy to add charter coverage, right? It's not a hard thing to do. And within charter coverage, what it covers is liability for paying passengers, guests. And, usually if you're paying crew, you just let your insurance broker know, hey, we're paying 2 crew, so that your policy can include paid crew liability coverage, which is really important because we're dealing with maritime law and it's so litigious. And so if you're paying someone on the boat and they get hurt, you can guarantee, and it's a bad injury, a lawsuit will be coming, and paid crew liability will cover that. But most policies specifically exclude paid crew liability unless it's added. So that's really important. And that's the scary one, because you're paying someone on a boat. In a lawsuit, you could be in trouble.
On a personal note, I had a sailboat in Fort Lauderdale. It was U.S. Coast Guard documented as a recreational vessel. Then I had to change it to a coastwise trade vessel and put on commercial use endorsements on that, along with putting on crew and liability coverage. And it did make my policy go way up to a charter policy. And that was the cost of doing business, of course.
Yeah, yeah. And it's anytime you are paying someone or someone is paying you for that boat, the liability exposure goes up so much. And so, yeah. And again, people are scared, like, oh, I'm going to have a hard time getting a charter policy, but it's actually really easy to do. It's just a little bit more expensive.
And I believe there's a distinction to be made between what we would call limited charter versus what they call
Full-time
full-time charter. That's what the lenders will call it. Do you align with that same terminology and cutoff? We could speak for hours about commercial
Yeah.
coverage and charter, and in fact, we might do a follow-up on that. So be sure to post your questions, and we can have another chat with Hugo on the matter. But limited versus full-time.
Yeah. So limited charter, in my experience, most policies on boats are limited charter, right? Some carriers say 120 days, some say 90, some will do it, 25 days. But limited charter coverage is basically what it is. You'll have your private pleasure policy, and then they endorse, or a rider, as some people call it, charter coverage, paying passenger liability, right, for limited charters. Now, if you got a boat and you're really doing charters every day, that more goes into a commercial policy, which is a completely different ball game. But in my experience, unless your boat's in a charter fleet, you're usually doing limited charter, especially if you're someone who is buying the boat and maybe wants to offset your expenses a little.
Okay, very good. Okay,
Like
that's
that
really
pleasure boater who wants to rent out his pontoon boat, a couple weekends a year.
Yes, exactly.
And thinks he's going to make money.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. He's just got himself a nice big headache.
Yeah, exactly. Two things we didn't touch on is pollution and salvage policies.
Great one. So, depending on the insurance company, salvage is a weird one, because people think of salvage and they think, oh, my boat's on the rocks. It's in a bunch of pieces. Now it has to be raised and disposed of. The salvage we normally see is actually, you're going along through a channel, I don't know wherever it happens, and your engines break down, or something, you lose your steerage, and now your anchor breaks or drags, and now you're going towards those rocks, and you hail on the radio, channel 16, help, anyone nearby can come get us. And if you're in Florida, especially Florida, you're going to have about 16 boats within 10 minutes circling you, even though the boat's fine, right? The boat's not on the rocks, it's drifting. You're going to have 16 boats circling in you, and you're going to have to make a decision. Do I take the line from these people? And they're saying, are you in danger? Confirm you're in danger.
Interesting.
Confirm you agree that this is a salvage. And it may not look like a salvage, but technically it is a salvage. If you take a line or assistance from someone and your boat's in danger, the tow company, the guy may have been really nice, but you're going to get hit with a really big bill. Depending on where it is, I mean, it could be up to like half the value of the boat, or some places it's the whole value of the boat. And so what was just a 5-minute tow to get you out of the channel to put you on the anchor, you get a letter in the mail for these salvage expenses, which can be huge.
Never heard this before.
I have
I'm like, wait,
absolutely
what?
heard it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it actually did
Yeah.
happen to me when my boat burned down. Like 5 other Tow and all these other people. Do you need this? You need a salvage? You need this? And I was coached by my insurance agent. Do not accept it.
Yeah. But sometimes you have to accept it. Sometimes you're really in danger and you have to. But most policies include salvage, right? And usually what happens is, on this $500,000 boat that I keep using as an example, they'll write a letter to the insurance company or to you and say, hey, give us $500,000, and the insurance company will usually just settle for much less. But in most policies, that is covered. In most policies, on the other side of salvage, which is this really scary one, which is you run aground and the boat, God forbid, is sinking or sank. You also have, you have the salvage expense, which is to get, for maybe them to float the boat and take it to a boat yard. But some policies, I'm not going to say who, will exclude wreck removal. And so we heard from a client that went with a cheaper policy, which again, I don't blame anyone for doing that. The carrier paid the cost of the boat or settled with them on the value of the boat, but now they have this boat with about 10 feet of the mast sticking out at a marina. They have to pay a company out of their own pocket to raise that boat, take it to a boat yard, and then pay the boat yard to dispose of it. And that's all on them. And so that's really important. And most policies include wreck removal, apart from 1 or 2. So just check that.
And the pollution question is a very interesting one. So here on the Chesapeake Bay, at the mouth of the West River, there was a yacht that basically we suspect, if I recall correctly, got hit by a submerged barge and decided to run aground to save itself from sinking, and stayed aground at the entrance of the river and was on its side, and presumably, diesel and whatever, leaking out of the boat. So that's what comes to mind to me for pollution liability. So can you speak to that a little bit? If there is a EPA concern or something like that, how does that get addressed? And in this case, there was actually a towboat U.S. vessel protecting the wreckage for weeks. I want to say several weeks, not far from me here.
Yeah.
That's got to have a huge cost.
It's a huge cost, and most policies will cover pollution. A lot of them define it as accidental fuel spill, right? So oil, or it could be debris too, right? And now they're mandating that a specialist company has to come and clean all this up. And so what is covered is accidental fuel spill, right? Exactly in that incident in most policies. Boat runs aground, spills oil, someone hits you, I don't know, somehow hits the diesel tanks, or now you're leaking diesel and you gotta get that cleaned up. What is not covered is like slow seepage of fuel. So let's say your boat's in the marina and you haven't been there in a week, and for some reason fuel has leaked into the bilge. Weeks go by, and every time that, and I'm sure it would clog up the bilge pump, but every few hours you're pumping out a gallon of oil or diesel into the harbor, and it's just a slow spill. That is not covered usually, but we rarely see that. It's usually worse than that. But yeah, long story short, pollution is covered, and accidental fuel spill is usually covered in policies.
Yeah, we hope to never have to deal with this kind of situation. This is pretty dire.
It's rare, but it happens. Also, usually, in a lot of policies exclude our environmental damage. So, I think that's an important one, but it's just a lot of the time how it is. Down in Florida, for example, they have like this protected seagrass in marine sanctuaries, which I think you're allowed to go into. You go and anchor in there, but you have to pick a sandy patch. And the Coast Guard or the FWC or whoever it is will, if you drag your anchor through this protected seagrass that turtles eat, which I think is a good law, you can be fined, I don't know what it is, $100 a square foot, right? I mean, we have never seen a claim for this, but it's just important to know you are not protected for punitive damages usually. So government fines are usually not covered. within that. So just be aware of that.
So, Hugo, one thing I wanted to clarify, at which point does your dinghy require its own insurance?
Good question. So most policies cover the dinghy or tender. That's the most claims we see out of anything, is like stolen dinghies or banged up dinghies. And so most policies will include that.
So the policy of the dinghy is inside the primary vessel somehow.
That's
Okay.
correct. And it will usually be scheduled. Usually it'll be right under the hull coverage, and then you'll list the value of the dinghy.
So it will be listed on the declarations page so the marina would know your dinghy is insured as well.
Correct. Some policies list it within the policy wording. Some policies will say we cover dinghies up to $15,000, but usually it's scheduled on the declaration page.
Okay, understood. And then if we go back to another consideration inside the policy, which I know in my case, restricting the cruising area for my boat to the Chesapeake Bay, because that's what made sense, meant that my premium was a little bit more manageable. Is this something that you massage a lot, those cruising areas? And then if I wanted to change my cruising area, can I do that easily? Walk us through the process and how difficult, how quick, like how much notice, that sort of thing.
A lot of people will call us and they're excited. They're buying their boats and they will tell me, we're buying this boat. And then the day after, we're going to go cruise to all around the world.
The next
And
day, right? 100%.
yeah,
We're going to the Bahamas tomorrow.
and I would be the same. Like if I buy a boat, I'm gone. But in my experience, it usually takes longer, right? You buy the boat and you get familiarize yourself and you don't really know your schedule. And so we can write you a policy that covers the whole world, but you're going to pay for it. And so what I advise my clients to do is, we'll sit down and say, okay, what are your realistic first year goals, or what are your goals this year? And they'll say, well, realistically, we're going to, work our way down, stop in a few places on the East Coast, and then go to the Bahamas and have a great winter there. And then maybe we'll get, to Southern Bahamas and decide we'd like to go to the Caribbean. Everyone says, we don't really know. And that's the whole point of owning a boat. And so the way I tell my clients to do it is say, look, if you're not really sure you're going to go to the Caribbean this year, or you're not really sure you're crossing the Atlantic, let's take it sort of in baby steps. Let's write you a policy with what the most likely cruising is going to be. That way, you're not paying some huge premium only to call us at the end of the year and say, oh, we never went to the South Pacific. Can we have our money back? And the carrier is not going to give you your money back. They're going to say, we wrote this policy. So what I say is, look, think you're going to go to the Caribbean? Maybe. Let's write you a policy for US Bahamas. And then, a few weeks before, if you decide to go to the Caribbean, then we can get Caribbean added onto your policy. Or if your current carrier can't write Caribbean, we'll switch you to another carrier that would be better suited for your cruising. Write a policy for what you're going to do. Don't write a policy for a fantasy cruising ground.
And Hugo, can you speak to special riders? So you want to go to a certain destination just for one trip, or let's say a racer even could want to go to Bermuda and back. Tell us about that, the riders. And what is a rider in essence?
Great question. A rider is an endorsement, right? So we're just telling you the words. So an endorsement, a rider. We use endorsement usually in the insurance world now for yachts. And so a rider is something that you essentially tack on to your insurance policy, and it's usually just a short-term allowance or a change in the policy. So the Bermuda question is one we get a lot. Hey, I know I said I'm just doing U.S. East Coast Bahamas, but we'd like to do the Salty Dog Rally, or we would like to do the Newport to Bermuda race. And so your insurance company can usually add that rider. They'll have it'll increase the premium, and they will have new warranties or stipulations. Warranty is a stipulation within the policy, but they can usually do that. In my experience, they're going to want experienced crew on that boat. So if you're buying the boat, you and your wife or you and your husband or whoever, you just bought the boat, you've sailed for a few weeks now, and now we want to go off to Bermuda or across the Atlantic, just the two of us. Usually the carrier is going to say, well, wait a minute, we'd like a bit more of experienced crew on there for this. But in my experience, we can usually get everything covered. It's just a matter of a lot of back and forth if you're doing something really funky. But, going to Bermuda's normal. adding the Caribbean, maybe you want to go down to the Caribbean for a few months. That's doable. It's just about a conversation with your insurance broker. Here's our plan. How do we get this done?
Understood.
Another big question is liveaboards. Is that a bad word? The liveaboard considerations when writing a policy.
So much so they call themselves a full-time transient,
Yeah,
like
a
we're finding
full-time
new
trans.
words for it.
Yeah, we hear it all. We're not liveaboards. We just stay on the boat all year round. No, everyone seems to be concerned that being a liveaboard makes them uninsurable. That was like many years ago. No, being a liveaboard is not a bad thing. Carriers can write liveaboards. Maybe it puts one or two carriers out of, maybe one or two won't write liveaboards. But no, if you're a liveaboard, say you're a liveaboard and let your insurance broker place correct coverage for you. What you don't want to do is where it asks on on the application form, the final app that you go to bind coverage with, are you a liveaboard? And then you write no, and then you have a claim and turns out you were a liveaboard. Don't do that. But being a liveaboard is not a bad thing. That when they ask, "Are you a liveaboard?" It's not to kick you out. It's just to make sure they understand the risk.
Terrific answer. It's a really good segue into the conversation we wanted to have around understanding what affects your premium, aka the cost of insurance. So we've talked already about a number of things, right? In terms of the size of boat, and obviously the value of the boat would probably command a higher premium. Can you speak a little bit more to type, age of boats? And then, of course, I think some of the big ones will be experience, usage, and claim histories. Give us a bit the rundown, Hugo, on what questions we should ask ourselves when it comes to premium and which ones matter most. Oh, it's a loaded
Yeah,
question.
that's the question. That's the first question we get always. And it's a good question. There are quite a few factors that go into this, what affects your rate, but I'll break it down briefly on, the main factors. So the boat you're buying is what it's going to be, right? So, that's what we start with. So if you're buying an older boat, let's say over 20 years or over 30 years, or your rate is going to be a little bit higher than if you were buying a new boat, and your deductibles will be higher on an older boat. But, you're not going to be paying way more because it's an older boat. It's just a little bit higher. Now, the big factors that if the boat remains the same, if we're working with the same boat, but owner and navigational variables change, the first uh, thing that really affects the rate, your experience, right? And have you owned boats before? If you haven't owned boats before, how long have you operated boats? A lot of people think that because they haven't owned a boat before, they can't get insurance. That's not true. If you've never owned a boat before and you've never been on a boat before, you're going to have a hard time. But most people who buy boats, they've done a charter maybe, or they've gone on a friend's boat, or maybe they've owned a smaller boat before. And so that you will pay a higher rate if you have not owned a boat before, or you don't have like a lot of really good experience, simply because statistically you have a higher rate of claims on first-time boat owners. It's just a number. It's a fact.
And that will hopefully go down after a year of, flawless record, perhaps. How long does it take to kind of get that, new boat buyer fleck of you? Like, give me a
Yeah,
good
yeah, yeah.
rate now.
Yeah, so it's interesting. Certain carriers have certain underwriting guidelines that they adhere to. They won't budge. So some insurance companies say we want 3 years of ownership minimum. We're not touching it until we do that. Some carriers say 2. Some carriers say 1. Some carriers say you don't have to have owned a boat. You just need a little bit of experience. And so, in my experience, rates, you really will start to see a rate decrease if you're doing the same thing and you haven't had claims. You're going into year 3, really. Year 2, you might get it down a little bit, but a lot of times what happens is, we say that to our clients, but then, our clients would have owned a boat and they started just cruising the Chesapeake Bay, and now they're crossing the Atlantic, and they said, well, you said our insurance is going to go down on year 3. And, you extend your navigation. I would say that don't expect your premiums to like really rapidly decrease until going into year 3.
Okay. But at least we
every
know,
year,
right? We don't want to get
yeah,
into this
yeah.
and not really know what to expect or have just
What about things like you having a U.S. Coast Guard captain's license or an ASA sailing certificate? Does that factor into premium cost?
It so it doesn't factor so much into the premium cost. What it can help you with is if you haven't owned a boat before or you're making a big jump in size, we can go to the insurance company and say, look, this person hasn't owned, a big boat like this before, but look, they've done charters, they have got their U.S. Coast Guard captain's license, they have some ASA courses. So that factors in more into the decision of insurability as opposed to rate. Um, does that make sense?
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
perhaps it may open even other carriers that may have higher regard for those either level of expertise or certifications.
Exactly. Exactly. It just gives you a stronger leg to stand on when you're, getting quotes from insurance companies. And as a broker, we do it all the time. The carrier will come back and say, look, well, this person doesn't have any experience. They've never owned a boat. And I'll say, well, look, they haven't owned a boat, but look, they've done they've really taken the time to get their ASA courses or their captain's license, or, we always try to push back on carriers and say, look, they've done charters, they've been on their friends' boats, they've owned a smaller boat before, they've got this experience. So it's a good thing to do. I mean, if you don't have much experience, an ASA course is a great thing just to learn, but I don't think an ASA course, I would spend my money going and getting a charter or going and trying to get more experience on boats, because an ASA course is not going to make or break your insurability. Captain's license will, because the captain's license, you have to have, I believe it's 360 days on the water. So, you will have done that.
Yeah, it's a much higher standard than a 3-day course with the ASA. I would know because I'm an ASA instructor and a U.S. Coast
Okay.
Guard captain.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah.
And then claim history is probably a big one, right? And whether it's maybe even car, like it doesn't have to be a boat claim. When you start up with a brand new owner and you find out about their history of insurance, uh, does it, how much does it matter if you
It's
have that sort of thing on your record?
It's important. A lot of people think because they had a claim, they're not going to get insurance. It's not true. It depends when it was. If it was a recent claim, you're probably going to have a little higher of a premium. But if you have a lot of claims, you might be not eligible, right? Because carriers look at you and say, it's unfortunate this happened, but you make claims, right?
No, thank you.
No, thank you. But stuff happens, right? Insurance companies understand that you might be 50 years old and you've had a few claims in your life. That's just that's the whole point you had insurance in the first place. No, you're not going to be ineligible for insurance. You just might pay a slightly higher rate. And certain carriers might not want to touch you until maybe you've gotten further away from a claim. I would say if
So
you've had 2 boat claims in the last 2 years, you're probably going to have a hard time getting insurance, or you're going to pay a lot more.
So we're talking now, of course, of rates, a rate. Can you give us kind of a formula or like what does it cost to have kind of a good overall comprehensive insurance? And by comprehensive, I don't mean the legal term, but more a well-rounded policy to cover your risk. Uh,
Recreational
yeah, can we
policy.
equate that recreational policy to the value of the boat? Like, how do we? What's a good number for someone who's never had to worry about insurance on their own boat, and now they're wondering, well, how much is it now? Tell me.
Yeah. That's a good question. If I may add one more factor to the insurance consideration,
Sure.
the insurance cost before I answer that, another thing that's going to affect your insurability is where do you want to keep it during hurricane season? What's your
Right.
navigation? And this will tie into the rate as well. Long story short, the further north you are during hurricane season, the lower your rate's going to be because it's lower risk of hurricanes and they're less frequent. So, if you're going to be in Florida for hurricane season, it is going to be more expensive than if you were going to be up in the Chesapeake Bay. That being said, you might live in Florida and it might all come out in the wash because to get your boat up to the Chesapeake Bay and to go fly up there and use it, you probably it's just going to be cheaper to keep it in Florida. So the further north you are, the cheaper the premium. Again, and talk to your broker and they can kind of maybe give you tips and advice and things like that on where to keep the boat. Now, regarding rates, this is a question that always ends in tears sometimes. So, you know, I hate, ballparking, but I will give you a very broad ballpark. If you're a first time owner, I would expect, but I'm going to give conservative numbers because I don't want anyone to expect a low rate and then be really disappointed. First time boat owner, I would expect between 1.5, depending on the boat, depending on what you're doing, to 3% of the hull value. So if your boat is, for easy numbers, if it's $1 million, you can expect, again, this is a conservative estimate, might be lower, but you can expect between 15,000, I guess, to 30,000. 30,000 is really high. Like, I don't think it's going to be that high. That would be a very rare thing. You know, if your boat's $1 million, use $15,000 as your ballpark, maybe lower, maybe higher. Now, if you've owned boats before and you're not making a big jump, you could probably expect 1 to 2%. 2% would be high, but 1% would be kind of a ballpark. A lot of the time it's lower than that.
Okay, but I think for budgeting purposes, it's so true. One of the things that we really insist on at Current Yachts anyway is to really be honest with our clients on the ongoing cost of ownership, because otherwise we're doing a disservice to our customers who turn around 2 years later and realize they really can't afford the boat that they purchased because they're realizing all the things that add up that weren't part of the picture. So that's obviously critical to have this information up front and be honest with your spreadsheet. Don't do the thing that people do sometimes. They just kind of have an idea and they don't really add it up. It matters. It is that important. So thank you for that guesstimate. We won't hold you to it, Hugo. So that's
Of
really, really
course.
helpful.
And people will call me and they'll ask the same question and they'll say, we don't know which boat we're buying. And I'll say, well, just pick a random one and we'll quote it for you. And that way you can actually go into this experience without the anxiety of, you've got a survey. Now you've wasted time seeing a boat, but you are still telling yourself an insurance cost. Let us actually put them in front of you so you can now make an educated decision.
And I bet one of the questions too you get a lot is, okay, so what is the most common type of claim that you get when it comes to marine insurance? We've mentioned a few times lightning strikes, I presume obviously more common for sailing yachts. What would you say is 80% of your claims volume on an annual basis?
Volume wise on sailboats, it's lightning strikes, right? It's the thing you can't control. You have no control over this. Hurricane claims are big ones, but they're not that frequent, right? It's maybe once a year. And then, a lot of claims we see are just people hitting other boats by going docking. It's always the docking stuff.
Docking hurts.
Yeah, and you can be so prepared, and then the tide catches you, or the wind catches you, or you know what it's like, and so it's you hit someone else's boat, or another boat hits you. It's always at the marina we see the. I would say that's the highest volume of claims, apart from lightning strikes that we see.
Yeah, what about fire, electrical fire, and with the new batteries, not necessarily the boat batteries, but battery powered devices that are less perhaps reliable than people think and can create issues. You've heard the tragic story in California a while back, this dive boat that had charging devices unattended that heated up and just created a gigantic human drama, right? Do you see a rise in these at all? I'm just wondering, how frequent are these electrical fires issues coming up?
Yeah, so regarding the lithium house batteries, if everything's done correctly, they're really safe. They are safe. So we actually have not. I mean, we saw a small claim where it was wired incorrectly. It didn't burn the boat down. It just caught a bulkhead on fire, and thankfully they caught it. But we did see these toys are scary. They're some of them are made wherever and unregulated, and the toys are the scary ones. Like, we saw a terrible claim. Thankfully, no one was hurt, but they're in the Bahamas. A family were in the Bahamas, and they had one of these electric surfboards, and it was stored like up in a forward cabin or something where they throw all their toys. And in the middle of the night, this thing caught fire, and the family had to jump off the boat and swim to shore. They were anchored, and they watched the. Thank God they weren't hurt, but the boat completely burned down and you cannot put a lithium fire out. You on these toys, you cannot put it out. It's impossible.
Yeah, so it's more the toys that are the damage. I mean, I have had a personal claim. My first boat was a very old boat, and the shore power connection was down in a lazarette where it couldn't be seen. And we often know that there can become an arc between the two, the dock power and the boat connection. And that's what happened. I was away. The boat had an arc and a fire started and basically had a total loss on a much older boat. And it's an unfortunate thing, but it does happen. And that's why they call them accidents. And these are things that I'm very thankful that I had a personal relationship with my insuring agent, and he was able to give me the correct advice to get through that tough situation. And thankfully, no other boats around me were caught fire and those types of things, because it could have been so much worse.
Yeah, you were very lucky. Like, that's terrible. Yeah, and back to what happened to you, like, um, in that situation, it could have been so much worse. Just thinking from an insurance perspective, like your boat could have caught fire, you could have been injured, someone on the boat could have been injured, and a lot of time when a boat catches fire at a marina, it runs the whole
Mhm.
dog, and then that's your liability. Now you're getting sued by 6 boat owners for their damage. But yeah, that's a terrible, terrible experience.
It does take us to the topic of choosing the right broker and the right carrier. So let's walk through the steps on how we would seek coverage working with a broker. Perhaps, Hugo, you can break this down for us. What should they know as far as choosing if a listener is thinking about talking to, an insurance broker?
Yeah. So what an insurance broker does, or agent, it's the same thing. Brokers write directly with insurance companies. Okay. So a lot of times on a yacht, most carriers, you cannot go direct to the insurance company because it's a specialist market, because everyone's doing something different. Carriers like to have a broker involved so the broker can actually place the risk correctly. And it also adds a level of protection for you, the owner. There could be a conflict of interest. If the insurance company is accepting your risk directly, they have their best interests, right? I mean, they want to cover you correctly, but they may not have your best interest. They may actually place you with a weaker policy and you just took it. So what a broker does is we write directly with multiple carriers, and depending on you and your boat and your navigation, a broker will then speak with you, help you to understand things you may not understand what you really need, understand what your future plans might be. And then from there, the broker will gather information, ask you questions, or get a application form. And then a good broker will read your application form before they just flick it
Pass
to
it
the
on.
insurance companies. Yeah, because people will say, I've never owned a boat before. The application says experience. People say no experience. Like, okay, so if we send that to the insurance company, they're going to say no. So usually we'll just call our client and we'll say, well, you see you have no experience. Have you been on any boats? Have you driven any boats? Oh, yeah, I've driven boats all my life. We use charter boats and things like that. And I'll say, well, you said you put no experience. And they'll say, well, we thought that meant ownership. And that's really important. A good broker will help you to not trip yourself up with an insurance company. And then from there, we'll speak with carriers, and the carriers will quote to us. We review the quotes, make sure they're correct coverage limits you need. And then, we'll send you quotes, send the boat owner or buyer the quotes, and then have a discussion. Here are the options. Here's ways we can change the premium. Or
How long would you say it takes for you to get all the information you need and verify with a boat owner or boat buyer to presenting quotes and having options on the table? Like a few days, a couple weeks? How long does that take?
no, a few days.
Okay.
It's once we get all the information and get it correct, and make sure we really understand what the boat owner needs. It takes 48 hours to hear back from carriers. Then we sort of discuss the quotes with the client, and you know explain, here are the coverages you might be sacrificing, and here's the things to know. And so it's an involved process. I mean, we probably spend like 3 or 4 hours minimum on the phone total before a policy is placed. And then also after you place coverage, it doesn't just end there. We probably talk to each client at least maybe 2 or 3 times a year at minimum. Yeah, and one thing I'd like to point out, I think it's really, really important for people to know this, because a lot of people think that a broker can help you with a claim. And this is something I like to disclose to my clients. I might be a really nice guy, and I might be really able to help you place coverage. But if you have a claim, you are going to deal with the insurance company. A lot of people think, oh, Hugo is great. Hugo's going to pay our claim. And it's not that way. I mean, what I can do is talk to you and help you understand how this claim might go. And we can kind of give the carrier a kick if they're dragging their feet. But what a broker does is make sure your coverage is correct off the bat, up front. And so that when you do have a claim that, firstly, before you even had the claim, you really understand, where is this carrier going to get you? What can this carrier use to deny coverage, right? And I love to highlight these things to my clients because it means that when they have a claim and they're going to get the claim paid. And it sometimes I can be a pain, right? People think, oh, Hugo wants us to do all these things, and a good broker will tell you things you don't want to hear, so that when the claim happens, you did those things so that the claim is smooth. But when you have a claim, you work directly with the insurance company.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Very good point.
And so once a quote comes back that a boat owner is or owner to be is happy with, time to have binding coverage, how long does that take?
So once a person decides that they're going to buy the boat and that they would like to put an insurance quote in place, usually we can get it done within 48 hours. But that's if the boat buyer can work with us on the forms. And we do it sometimes within a day. But I would expect 48 hours, as long as you're actually getting back to us and answering questions. There are always some questions. I mean, as you know, everything's on ice, everything's cool. We're waiting for the survey. Survey comes back, then the process starts going really fast, right? We could talk about survey recommendations for hours, but again, that's why it's good to work with a good yacht broker who, when you get your survey back, because the insurance company is going to want to know, uh, when are you going to fix these? Which ones will you fix? Which ones don't you want to fix? And you don't have to fix everything, but the insurance company just wants to understand, which ones are you going to do? Which ones are you not going to do? And the insurance companies are pretty reasonable about these things. That's why it's good to work with a good yacht broker who is able to actually sit down with you and go, okay, I can help you find someone to fix these recommendations, or I can help you find someone who can talk to you about this, or here's a good boat yard. Here's what's hard to do. Here's what's not. Here's what's going to cost you a lot of money. Here's what is going to be cheap.
And sometimes I was going to add some of these corrections may come from a lender. If a lender is involved, there are going to be requirements for like, we are not going to be able to underwrite on the lending side this boat unless, fire extinguishers are replaced and this is done and this is done. And so those things usually go hand in hand. If there is no lender, for the sake of the buyer, right, they're going to need to address the top level items that are usually identified in the survey. So yes, the insurance could be reasonable. We also, as yacht brokers, make sure that our owners to be are in good hands and in the right boats. The survey allowance may not be enough because you're going to have these things addressed and have a proof. Usually it's a statement that you sign to say, yes, I have done these corrected actions. So just for everybody to be aware, there's what, of course, you may mandate on the insurance side, but there are other requirements out there from different parties for the benefit of the buyer.
And what is the name of that document, Hugo? A survey that insurance will require, just for everyone's sake?
That is called the letter of survey compliance.
Right.
And that is a form that every boat buyer will get very familiar with. And all boats have recommendations. Like, no matter how perfect, you could survey a brand new boat, it's going to have a few pages of recs, and it's a good thing. And everyone worries about it, but it's actually, most of these are just quick fixes. And so what a letter of survey compliance does is the carrier sees your survey. They say, here are your recommendations. And then you, as the boat owner, will complete the letter of survey compliance, which gives the schedule of which ones you will do and by which date, and which ones you won't do. And they're not making you do all of them, but that allows the insurance company to get a picture of what's this person's plan. And I know you guys are good at this, but the boat owner will have to have a good yacht broker to hold their hand to really help them with this. Because as an insurance agent, I can tell you what the carrier will probably want, but I can't help you with your schedule on these.
And that is why it's critical to work with a yacht broker that you trust and enjoy working with, because that process can take a while to find the right boat for you so that you don't try to make the wrong boat right for you after survey. That is usually not the right approach. Thank you so much for your time, Hugo. Final words of wisdom for our listeners. What would you like to share that you perhaps haven't mentioned today?
Yeah. So what I would say is, buying the boat is an involved process. You need a good yacht broker behind you who's patient and who actually is honest and trustworthy and doesn't have to sell you this boat. That's a huge one. And then a good insurance broker who can actually take the time and help you understand things. And, I would say if you're not sure if you're buying a boat, but insurance is a concern of yours in the back of your head, maybe call a yacht insurance broker. And that way you can help be prepared. And everyone's scared of insurance, but it's sure, it's a process, but it's not some impossible thing.
Well, and you made it that much more approachable. So thank you, Hugo. We will put a link to Hugo's website for a quote if you'd like to hit that up and talk to Hugo. You'll be able to do that, as well as download the insurance checklist, which indicates the questions you should ask yourselves to prepare for your call with your insurance broker. Like and subscribe to follow Current Yachts and our podcast. We'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.
Thank you
Farewell.
both for having me.
Fair
Thanks,
winds.
Hugo.